Studies Section 14, Open Economy, Macroeconomics. Introduction. You should know by now that all our analyses, both in the short run, middle run, and long run, were done for a closed economy. All macroeconomic variables discussed were strictly domestic economic variables. It follows that we treated an economy as if foreign economy has no effect on our economy. We know that this is certainly not true. Actually, foreign economy plays a major role in how domestic economy behaves. In the world, hardly can an economy operate in isolation of the rest. Even at that, it does not mean such an economy cannot be affected by foreign economy. In the case of Nigeria, there is a strong bilateral, regional, and multilateral relations. So any change in the economic behavior of the trade partner will like to have an impact on the performance of the economy. For instance, during the early 1970s, 1990s, and 2000s, when world oil price rose, Nigeria's foreign exchange rose, and this large increase had significant effect on our economy. Also, when oil price plummeted in early 1980s, Nigeria's economic performance was in chaos. Recently, when the US and others experienced financial failure, Nigerian economy was affected through its capital market and government revenue. The labor market of Nigeria would have been more saturated. Thanks to expansionary migration policy of the advanced countries, migration networks, and high technology from the West, this policy allowed thousands of unemployed workers to migrate abroad on visa lottery to earn their living. The increase in migration also led to increase in workers' remittances. In 2000, workers' remittances was 1.39 billion US dollars and rose to 16.89 billion US dollar in 2006, and by 2010 it was computed to be more than 19 billion US dollars. This large inflow accounted for between 6% and 11% of GDP from between 2000 and 2010. If Nigeria was not connected to the world, this huge foreign inflow cannot be realized. The foreign direct investment and portfolio investment have also been increasing. The construction of most of Nigerian roads was carried out by the foreigners. Our oil exploration was completely operationalized by foreign companies. The likes of UAC, Coca-Cola, Beechman Smithkline, and a host of other direct investment in Nigeria were as a result of Nigeria being open to the rest of the world. Trade in goods and services is enormous, and only God knows how the country would have survived if there were not international trade. Meanwhile, trading with the rest of the world tells more stories about the behavior of Nigerian economy. For instance, large inflow of remittances and crude oil revenue leads to appreciation of naira. This appreciation will lead to cheap import and so increases demand for foreign goods, thereby causing unemployment. The monetary authority may come in to arrest this appreciation through the purchase of domestic currency and likely lead to inflation. This is just one example of why we should analyze the effect of openness on the economy so as to move as close as possible to economic reality. Openness in goods markets. We assumed earlier that there was not need to distinguish between domestic demand and foreign demand for domestic goods. We need to know that in most cases, domestic demand includes foreign goods. In an open economy, the demand for domestic demand is given by the following relation. The first three terms in the right-hand side are not new. They constitute domestic demand carried out by the household C, the firms I, and the government G. In an open economy, domestic output that is consumed by the foreigners is captured by X. We need to subtract part of domestic demand that constitute foreign goods. Now, remember that if we want to add the amount of t-shirt produced in the US but consumed in Nigeria, we need to subtract the monetary value naira equivalent of the t-shirt. Thus, the parameter is the exchange rate that is used to convert the value of foreign goods consumed in Nigeria to Nigerian currency. From our earlier understanding of IS relation, we know that the consumption is determined by income level, Q is equivalent to Y, while investment depends on interest rate I, while government spending is autonomous. This implies that if an American needs Nigerian goods that cost 153 naira, he only needs $1 to purchase it. Now, assuming that the naira rate of dollar is 127, that is, if exchange rate falls from 153 to 127 naira, to buy a good worth 153 naira, how much dollar will be needed? Of course, $2. This simple example shows that when small amount of naira can be exchanged for a unit of dollar, say naira good becomes expensive and so less of it will be bought. Now, let us turn the story. Still assume that naira dollar rate is 153 naira. Now, if the exchange rate falls to 127 naira, Nigeria can buy 2 units of that product if the price is still $1. This means that the lower the naira-dollar exchange rate, the more cheaply imported goods becomes and the higher the demand for imported products. Thus, imports are determined by 2 important variables, the income of level Y and exchange rate J. The higher the income, the higher the import demands. The lower the exchange rate, the higher the import demands. This statement is captured by the following relation. What about the determinant of export? Note that export demand are carried out by foreigners. It is the demand for domestic good by foreigners. As we have analyzed the other time, if an American wants to buy a product worth 153 naira, he only needs to provide $1 when the exchange rate is 153 naira. But when the exchange rate is 127 naira, we need to provide roughly $2. If we could not get $2, we cannot buy and hence demand will fall. Thus, the lower the exchange rate, the lower the export demand. Also, if things go well in the US and income improves and if the exchange rate is still 153 naira, Americans will increase their demand for our products. Therefore, the higher the foreign income, the higher the demand for exports. Thus, exports are determined by foreign income and exchange rate. This is captured in equation 14.3, where Y asterisk is foreign income. Our interest is to get the demand for domestic good, and to do this, we subtract import from export. If we do this, what we get is called net export. That is, the difference between export and import is the net export, NX. Thus, substituting equations 14.2 and 14.3 into 14.4, we get. However, when income increases, agents will not spend the entire increase on import. Thus, given export and holding J constant, increase in domestic income will increase import, and by equation 14.5, net export will fall provided foreign income is constant. Conversely, if export rises, holding domestic income and exchange rate constant, net export will increase. Therefore, there is a negative relationship between net export and domestic income. When domestic income rises and import exceeds export volume, net export will be negative. The interpretation of this is that domestic output is less than domestic consumption, and so the excess demand is accounted for by imports. If net export is positive, it means that export exceeds imports, meaning that the economy was able to produce more than it can consume and hence sell the excess to foreigners. The graphical illustration of this is presented in figure 14.1. The two graphs describe what happens when net export is positive or negative. When domestic demand consumption is less than domestic output, net export is positive and we call this trade surplus. When domestic demand consumption exceeds domestic supply output, net export will be negative and we call this trade deficit. When domestic demand is equal to domestic supply, or when the value of export is equal to the value of import, that is, we export as much as we import, net export is zero and we call this trade balance. This occurred at point E' in the diagram. Equilibrium output and the trade balance. When domestic output is just equal to domestic demand, we say the goods market is in equilibrium. At equilibrium, it is expected that Y is equal to Q. Now, if we substitute equations 14.2 and 14.3 into 14.1, we have the IS relation in an open economy can now be written as, that is, equilibrium output is a function of taxes, foreign income output, domestic income output, interest rate, government spending, and exchange rate. Part B of section 14. What is the relationship between equilibrium output and trade balance? There is no real relationship. At equilibrium output, net export may be in deficit or surplus. There is no reason why equilibrium output will be the level of output at which trade is balanced. This appears strange, but a simple example will make it clear. Assuming that the economy is at equilibrium and that at the point of equilibrium, trade is balanced. Thus, we should have a graph like the one in figure 14.2. Here, trade is balanced and the output is at equilibrium, but this equilibrium is attained below full employment output, YF. Let us assume that the government intends to increase its spending so as to help push the economy towards full employment. Increase in government spending will generate direct and indirect effect. The direct effect comes from direct purchase of goods and services by the government. The indirect effect comes through employment and hence income generation. The increase will then lead to increase in consumption. Both of these effects will shift aggregate expenditure up as shown in figure 14.3. The multiplier is smaller because part of it leaks out through imports. Thus, in an open economy, an increase in domestic demand has a smaller effect on output than in the closed economy. First implication. It also has adverse effect on trade balance. Second implication. We can push the argument further, that is, the more open an economy, the smaller the effect of fiscal policy on equilibrium output and the larger the adverse effect on trade balance. Effect of foreign fiscal policy on domestic equilibrium output. Clearly, we see that when an economy is open, domestic fiscal policy gives two counteracting effects. It improves output but also deteriorates current account. But what about foreign fiscal policy? How will this affect domestic output? Let us assume that the UK government increases government spending so as to help the economy out of recession. This will lead to increase in British income. Part of this income will be spent on the purchase of Nigerian goods, thereby increasing Nigeria's export to Britain. Let us use graphical exposition to describe the implication of this policy on Nigeria's output and trade balance. This is demonstrated in figure 14.4. Our economy is at equilibrium at point A and the trade imbalanced. Now, increase in foreign income due to expansionary fiscal policy leads to increase in demand for our export. This shift aggregates expenditure curve upwards and our output GDP increases from Y0 to Y1. This is not the end of the story, since it is our export increase. Our net export will be affected too. The net export curve will shift upwards from NX0 to NX1, and this leads to trade surplus because our net export is greater than 0 at NX1 given by the distance between D and E. Now, note that when export increases, domestic income increases and by implication, import will also increase, equation 14.2. The increase in import due to foreign fiscal policy tends to reduce the magnitude of trade surplus. Let us consolidate what we have learned in this section. When foreign income increases due to improved economic condition, domestic income will also increase through increase in export demand, and by implication, this will increase import demand. The increase in export demand will be more than offset the increase in import demand, so that trade balance will be in surplus. The extent of trade balance improvement following foreign fiscal stance depends on the domestic marginal propensity to import, MPM. The larger the MPM, the smaller the trade surplus. As long as MPM is less than 1, increase in foreign income will lead to trade surplus. We have examined how fiscal policies of both domestic and foreign government affect domestic output and trade balance. Domestic government fiscal expansion will increase output but worsens current account. Foreign government fiscal expansion will increase both output and current account surplus. Since no government will like current account deterioration for the fear of being indebted to the world, domestic government will want to correct recession and current account situation by waiting, praying for foreign government to embark on fiscal expansion. But will this be possible? Perhaps no. Why? Let us use a simple two-country example. Assuming that Nigeria and the US are the only two countries in the world and the two countries are very open to each other. Assuming that the two countries are in recession and require government intervention, if the two countries are having current account balance, Nigeria will be reluctant to raise government spending while the US government may also not be willing to do so. If no one takes a bold step to increase spending, the two countries will continue to suffer from recession, low output. Now, assuming that the US takes a step, recession will be eliminated, but at the expense of current account deterioration and hence increase in foreign debt. Nigeria's current account will be in surplus and recession will also be eliminated. This may not be possible, particularly if Nigeria and the US strongly depend on each other. Thus, in an open economy, there exists macroeconomic war among nations. Two options are available in resolving this war. First, the two countries can increase spending simultaneously without informing each other. The second option is for the two countries to form a coalition and agree on how to make use of their macroeconomic policies in such a way as not to worsen each other's economy. The first option is suboptimal because of the magnitude of effect. The second appears better provided the countries involved would stay put by the agreement. The economic giants of the world, that is, the so-called group of 7G7, adopt the second option by forming what is called macroeconomic coordination among nations. These countries meet from time to time to discuss their macroeconomic situations. When the global financial crisis occurred, these countries met and agreed to pump into the economy in order to avert possible economic problems. In Africa, such economic coordination is yet to emerge, or at best, such coordination has not been effective. Exchange rate, equilibrium output, and current account balance. Let us assume that the price level of both domestic and foreign is given as P and P**, respectively. We define real exchange rate J as the ratio of the product of nominal exchange rate J and domestic price to foreign price, that is. Now, assuming that relative price is constant, increase in the value of J, nominal exchange rate, will lead to 1-for-1 increase in real exchange rate. When nominal exchange rate increases, it means more domestic currency, say Naira, will be exchanged for a unit of foreign currency, say dollar. In this case, we say Naira has depreciated against the dollar. If nominal exchange rate appreciates, real exchange rate also appreciates, provided relative price remains the same. When Nigeria's currency depreciates against dollar, what effect will it have on equilibrium output and trade balance? The effect of depreciation on trade balance depends on whether it satisfies the Marshall-Lerner condition or not. What is this condition? Recall that net export is given as. If we substitute the export and import functions into this equation, we will get. The equation says that net export current account balance is affected by exchange rate through three channels. Thus, if Nigeria's currency depreciates, current account balance will be affected through three channels. The first channel is through increase in export. When Naira depreciates, our goods and services becomes relatively cheaper, and this enables foreigners to patronize and increase their demand for our goods and services. That is, depreciation makes our products to be highly competitive at the world market, and this increases our export proceeds. The second channel is through decrease in import. When Naira depreciates, imports of goods and services become relatively expensive compared to domestic ones. That is, foreign goods is less competitive in Nigeria and hence reduces our import outlay. Second, if the ML condition holds, improvement may not be guaranteed. This is because depreciation affects spending agents differently. First, those who are fond of purchasing imported goods will be worse off because, first, they are going to buy less due to relatively expensive goods. Second, the few ones bought will be purchased at relatively high price. Thus, depreciation reduces real income and by implication, this reduces the consumption and investment spending of domestic goods, and this will lead to decrease in domestic output. Third, when exchange rate depreciates, we still need to think of the trade policy of the trading partners. For instance, if the foreign economy embarks on tight import policy, not only that, depreciation tends to affect capital account and its effect depends on whether capital is perfectly mobile, imperfectly mobile, or perfectly immobile. Take an example of perfectly mobile capital. When there is depreciation, domestic income will increase, shifting the IS curve outwards and hence increase in interest rate. In the face of perfect capital mobility policy, there will be massive inflow of capital following slight increase in interest rate. The inflow of capital will lead to reduction in exports and both output and current account will fall. Our analysis shows that government fiscal expansion will improve output at the expense of current account balance. If ML condition holds, depreciation will improve current account deficit, all things being equal. Which policy should government use if it wants to reduce current account deficit and achieve full employment, that is, when the authorities want to achieve both internal and external balance? Government can do this by combining two policies such as exchange rate policy and fiscal policy. Since depreciation works well for reducing current account balance and increasing output through ML condition, and fiscal contraction improves current account balance and reduce output, government can combine exchange rate depreciation with fiscal contraction to correct trade deficit without necessarily overheating the economy. This policy is one of many policy mix that government can adopt if it cares about output level and current account balance. Other policy mix includes exchange rate appreciation and fiscal expansion, exchange rate depreciation, and monetary contraction, etc. It must be noted that these policies give different outcomes depending on what the authorities want to achieve. In our example, government want to correct trade deficit and discourage inflation. If government wants to increase output and maintain current account balance, the policy mix will have to change. Also, the effectiveness of any of these policies. If government wants to increase output and maintain current account balance, the policy mix will have to change. Also, the effectiveness of any of these policies depends on the exchange rate regime and the position of capital mobility of the country. Generally, government needs to understand the initial situation of the economy and the macroeconomic policies on ground together with general economic environment vis-a-vis foreign economy before choosing a particular policy mix. Government should know that if the state of the economy is not well understood, this policy can be wrongly chosen and worsen the situation that is expected to correct. Another complexity in this analysis is the magnitude of the policy. That is, the authorities need to ask a question such as by how much should government change spending? A good understanding of the behavior of the economy, particularly the historical behavior of how the spending agent responds to policy change, will be of help. Another solution to this problem is to use econometric method to estimate a rough magnitude of response, and with the aid of simulation, the authorities can get the right magnitude to achieve a particular target. Whichever the case, just bear it in mind that it is not as easy as the textbook submission, but the textbook submission exposes various difficulties and complexities that may be encountered. The textbook analysis also exposes us to what may likely happen if we take a particular action, and it warns us not to make a mistake in the course of deciding the type of action we need to take. The textbook analysis informs us that when taking such action, we should be mindful of possible interaction with the rest of the world since we are not operating an autarkic economy. Finally, the textbook discussion tells us that if all the policies are well articulated, it will work out well. Summary: when an economy is open, demand for domestic goods is the sum of private consumption, firms' investment, government finance spending, and foreign demand for domestic goods minus foreign goods. When demand for domestic output increases, domestic income also increases at a decreasing rate because part of the increase is spent on import, which leaks out of the economy. Increase in government spending leads to increase in output but also worsens trade balance. Increase in foreign income leads to increase in domestic output and improvement in trade balance. If a country is well open to each other, each country tends to play a waiting game, and at the end, they will all fail to correct recession. One way out is for the economies to simultaneously raise their government spending. They can do this by forming economic coalition and coordinate their macroeconomic policies by meeting from time to time and review their macroeconomic performance in order to know the type of policies they will jointly and/or individually take. If the ML condition holds, real depreciation improves current account balance provided relative price remains the same. Government needs to understand and be well versed about its economic situation and environment before choosing appropriate policy mix to attain a set of economic goals.